Greetings, everybody. It is the Ash Heriter, and welcome to the finale of my Crusader Kings 3 Amazigh playthrough. Unfortunately, I have to end it on with a little bit of bad news. I will be unable to actually play the final episode due to PC instability and the fact that my save, both it and the backup, seem to crash within minutes of turning it on. So I don't know if that's a mod issue or what. I'm going to experiment around before the new campaign to make sure that it's all running smoothly again. But I will be starting up a new campaign soon enough. But in preparation for the finale, I did write up quite a nice final send-off for the entire campaign. So this will be a bit of a shorter episode, but I think it'll be a nice, epic episode where we will go through all of the rulers and their accomplishments, much like I did in the Manichaean campaign, except better. I did that rather impromptu, without knowing that I was going to do that from the start, so I had to make up quite a bit of information there, and kind of say, oh yeah, history is told by the victors. We won't be doing that now. Most of this is pretty accurate. So, to start, Tinhinan the Second, technically. We'll call her Tinhinan the First, for the purpose of this dynasty. We won't be counting the mythical Tinhinan here. But alright, it all began with Tinhinan, the warrior princess, the inheritor of a lineage of great queens, from the mythical Tinhinan of yore to the courageous defender Zahia, who fought off the Umayyad invaders for many years. Tinhinan's reign began in the region of Tuat, a corridor of oases through the Great Sahara. She began her reign by raiding and expanding the territory of her tribe, pushing farther and farther outward. She had many husbands during her long reign, and fathered 6 children. Unfortunately, 2 of those children died. A son due to mysterious circumstances, and her heir, Heda, slain in an impromptu duel with her sister Celia. To her enemies, Tinhinan was a terror, and to the people of the Sahel, she was the woe and darkness that descended from the northern deserts every few years to pillage their lands. But Tinhinan was not only a warrior, she was a builder. She constructed 2 grand qanats to bring water to her people, and restored the divide in the oasis city of Sijil Masa. And most importantly, she refounded the ancient Amazigh kingdom, and left the legacy for what was to come. However, the end of her reign heralded great instability, for even before her death, at the age of 74, her children were already fighting amongst themselves. And so the throne passes to Dima. Succeeding Tinhinan as Emira of the Grand Amazigh Emirate, Dima was the daughter of Tinhinan's daughter Heda, who was ruthlessly slain in a duel against her own sister Celia. While Tinhinan never reprimanded Celia for this act, Dima, upon ascending to the Amazigh throne, was not about to let the murder of her mother go unpunished. For that, her first act was to imprison her kin-slaying aunt. But Celia escaped and led a brutal rebellion that was ultimately crushed, before she was finally captured and tortured to death by the vengeful Dima. Unfortunately for Dima, the instability did not end there. Hated by her uncle Azar and several other lesser emirs, she fought a second, even more brutal rebellion, and made extensive use of mercenaries to fend off many incursions from the Islamic Butur tribes, who undoubtedly saw her reign as weak. Mothering many children, including a significant number of bastards, Dima's reign was tumultuous, to say the least, even if she did manage to expand the domain even while on the defensive. For all her accomplishments, Dima was nevertheless considered to be a misguided, lustful sinner in the end. And upon her death, her throne passed to Heda II. Taking the throne after Dima died from natural causes, Heda was known as a scholar to most, though again, she came into a tumultuous and unstable realm. Quickly putting down a rebellion, Heda proved to be a calculating ruler, making bribes and swaying her rivals to her side with her charisma, and exploiting the weaknesses of her neighbors. In that regard, she made significant territorial expansions, seizing the southern Tunisian coastline and several mountain strongholds in Morocco. With the end goal of bringing the Imazigh faith into new glory, Heda managed to seize the holy sites of Janet and Tinmilal, but alas, perished during a peasant revolt just before she could bring the faith into its glorious reformation. With her death, Tinhinan II ascended the throne. Perhaps inadequate for rule from the beginning, Tinhinan II nevertheless upheld the prestige of her name by swiftly fending off 2 Muslim invasions during her early and intermediate reign, and securing a peaceful transition into power, quelling the unrest in her court even before it escalated into all-out war. But these accomplishments pale in comparison to the great accomplishments that she is known for. Like the forebearer of her name, her legacy is a great one, for it was Tinhinan II that reformed the Amazigh faith, centralizing its doctrines and making it the official state religion of her kingdom. But that is not all she accomplished, for with this organized religion standing behind her, she was quickly able to settle her people, setting aside their tribal lineages and coming together as a single, unified identity. But even that was not where her accomplishments ended, for she concluded her reign with a quick and effective conquest of the former territory of the fabled Carthaginian Empire along the Tunisian coast, thus granting her people even more access to fertile territory and coastline. With her death, the rule of the Amazigh Grand Emirate passed on to its first male heir, Tanan. Amir al-Umara Tanan's rule began with tragedy, the death of his wife during childbirth, and an immediate dissolution of Tinhinan's II order throughout the realm. One of the longtime sycophants of Tinhinan II proved to be a far less loyal ally to this new Amir, inciting rebellion amongst the many lesser Amirs after accepting the lavish gifts offered to him by Tanan. The breakaway faction sought to sunder the Grand Emirate by forming the Kingdom of Africa, with himself at its head. But Tanan was not to be intimidated. His charismatic reputation, cultivated in an air of mystique crafted by the enigmatic mask he always wore, was one tempered by a hard and ruthless edge. Tanan swiftly and brutally dealt with the dissidents, defeating rebel armies and capturing their leaders. Safely imprisoned, the leaders were stripped of all their power and left to rot within Tarudan's dungeons. For Tanan was wise enough to know that he shouldn't bloody his hands with the execution of members of his own family. So instead, he let degradation and atrophy claim revenge for him. Later in his reign, Tanan seized territories to the north and engaged the crumbling kingdom of Ghana to the south to seize control of the yet-built Timbuktu. Unfortunately, even after seizing Marrakesh, gout would claim him, and leave his budding empire to be fractured into 3 kingdoms. Thus would the reign pass to Temzi. Beginning her reign from the capital of Ifni, Temzi would be confronted with an unstable court, weakened due to the division between Tanan's heirs. With these dissidents immediately attempting to seize her throne, Temzi's reign was immediately beset by a brutal war, which she strategically won. Dismantling, imprisoning, and then executing all of the dissidents, she made it abundantly clear to her realm that rebelling against her reign was utter folly. From there, she endured continuous onslaughts from the southern Islamic state of Zamur and the Islamic-held Canary Island Emirate. But still, throughout these onslaughts, she still managed to make minor territorial gains along her borders. Eventually, she succumbed to her infirmities, and Sakura claimed the throne. Her rise was bloodless. With no outstanding dissidents, and the entire realm passing to her directly, Sakura's charisma was able to sway over potential enemies and allies alike. With the Diani Grand Emirate stable, she set her sights on reclaiming the breakaway states that had formed after her grandfather Tanan's death. Successfully reclaiming these states through force, and seizing the territories along the Mediterranean coast, as well as the entire emirate of Marrakesh, Sakura made plans to form the Tamazra Empire, and truly unite her people under one banner, thus fulfilling the legacy of Tinhinan. But alas, moments before she could begin her coronation as Malika of all Tamazra, she perished from the excitement and the strain it put on her ailing body, leaving the throne to her young daughter Dahia II. Born with a strong and glorious name, and bearing all of the traits of a child of destiny, Dahia proved herself immeasurably during the first few years of her reign. Finishing her mother's work, her first act was to crown herself Malika of the Tamazra Empire and consecrate the Diani bloodline, making herself known as the Blood Mother of the Amazigh people. Not content with merely ruling an empire and seeing the plight of her fellow Africans beneath the rule of foreign invaders, Diani set her sights on liberating Egypt, and indeed bringing all of Africa under one unified banner so that it could never again be threatened by foreigners. But to do so, she would need to secure the immeasurably lucrative mines of Mali, and thus was forced to engage a war against her own people. But these wars were fought with chivalry and honor. Dahlia pardoned all prisoners of war, and utilized her elite horsemen and Fari to spare her own common folk from the rigors of war, winning many decisive battles and making significant territorial conquests across Mali and the Sahel, seizing the gold mines of Mali to fund her empire's future wars against the European invaders in Egypt. But alas, Dahlia perished before being able to prosecute those wars, leaving her realm to her son Azar. Azar inherited a stable realm, and ensured that the realm remained stable by foregoing the expansionistic approach of the rulers before him, and instead focusing on developing infrastructure throughout the realm. Known for his cheery demeanor, outstanding moral character, and the many feasts he held at his capital in Ifni, Azar was considered one of the more benevolent rulers throughout the Amazigh's history. Even so, he made several smaller-scale territorial advances throughout West Africa, even if his crowning achievements was developing the gold mines in Mali to produce a measure of wealth not yet seen by the world. And with that wealth, Azar and his mother Dahlia's legacy would make the dreams of their descendants possible. When he, at long last, perished, it was his son Rashid that would ascend the throne. Considered improvident and too generous for his own good, Rashid grew up with too much wealth to know what to do with. In turn, his empire's progress was halted, and many of his disloyal vassals decided that Rashid's generosity was not nearly favored towards them enough as it could be, and thus flew into open rebellion. Rashid dealt with the rebellion swiftly, and consolidated his rule, doing away with the peaceful ways of his father to make good on his grandmother's oath to free the people of Africa from the European occupiers, and thus he set his sights on Egypt. At first, he nibbled away at Libya, liberating Cyrenaica. While some sought to undermine him or even outright assassinate him, his loyal elder sister and chancellor, and his heathen friend, the Emir of Anbiya, backed him up and provided him with a court stable enough from which to launch a grand holy war for Egypt, in the name of Ammon and Tanit. With Egypt secured, he turned his attention against Jerusalem, for they too held territory that rightfully belonged in African hands. Launching a brutal, grueling war, he seized Alexandria, but was, from then, unable to secure any more territorial gains before his age caught up to him. And that brings us to our last ruler, to Ajan. Ascending to the Diani throne during her childhood, Ajan's early reign was a tested one, for she was too young to rule, and thus required the counsel of the various emirs, amirs, and other nobles throughout the realm, who inevitably attempted to use her for their own schemes. But Ajan stayed true to the tenets of her dynasty, and followed in the footsteps of Tinhinan, Dahlia, and the inheritors of those names, rapidly learning how to wield the vast Diani Empire with natural talent. She quickly earned the respect of her peers, and upon coming of age, began fulfilling the dynasty's dream. Pious and faithful to the old gods, Ajan sought divine guidance from Amun and began the final reconquest of Africa, repelling the European invaders and securing Amazigh dominance across the continent. She would be known as a benevolent and just ruler to the African people, allowing cultures to flourish under Amazigh rule, and vowing not to interfere with the state of other African nations beyond her borders. Only when the threat of Europe, or the Arab East, reared up once more did she take up arms again, and it was under her rule that the Empire of Tamazra would finally achieve the glory and peace it was due. It was by her rule that the destiny of the Diani dynasty was fulfilled. And that is where we come to our ending. Thank you so much to everybody that has stuck with me throughout this entire epic playthrough. It was an absolute joy to play through this entire series. Amazing to explore this culture that was, to me, rather new. It was very interesting to read about the Amazigh people and to learn about the uniqueness of this civilization and how it still persists today. I hope that my further Crusader Kings campaigns will do justice to other mostly underviewed cultures. And with that, I do plan on putting out a new Crusader Kings campaign rather shortly. I may have to wait for the expansion to drop so as to not cause any potential mod instability issues when that goes, but rest assured, the next campaign will be up in due course, so stay tuned. Once again, thank you to everybody that has stuck with me throughout this entire journey, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Ash Harrider out.